How can we make the world better? By making ourselves better. The Dr. Joe Show explores how you can make positive personal change by using his groundbreaking and highly effective I Am approach to understand who we are and why we do what we do. Your small changes can have big effects.
Join us now for the Dr. Joe Show with Mark Stiles of Stiles Law, Thomas McCoy, and your host, Dr. Joe Schrand.
Welcome to the Dr. Joe Show. Yeah, we are here. We are here. Mark went somewhere. We're here.
I should probably close the door. If I'm
okay, you want to see something really funny? So we did this Comic-Con autograph signing thing over the weekend with the Zoom kids, and these were all over the wall.
I love it.
What I'm showing here is one of the first pictures of me from Zoom, 1972, 50 years ago.
I have a request. Can I please, pretty please, with sugar on top, have an autographed version of that so I can frame it?
I would be honored and delighted with no charge, Mark. No charge.
No charge at all? I love it.
Charge.
That is awesome. That must have been so much fun. Nostalgia is such an amazing concept.
It is. It's really quite remarkable.
I was actually away during the 4th of July for the first time in my life outside the country on our Independence weekend. And it was just July 4th, 2022 in España. So I went to Spain, Dr. Joe, with my family and my in-laws, who I adore so very much. So we tried to do a big vacation every year, starting about 7 years ago, and then COVID blew it up for a couple, so it was time. So we went to Barcelona, where one of Julie and I's nieces is working, studying abroad, if you will. And beautiful city, but you know what? When in Spain, what do you have to do?
Go to a bullfight?
The sun also rises.
Yes.
I mean, Ernest Hemingway. You're in Spain, you go to a bullfight.
Right. Did you?
Yes.
Wow. And?
I was very ignorant going into the whole thing.
No bull. Go ahead. Let's hear about it.
So Bugs Bunny, right? Looks fun. It looks artistic. It's an event. It's cheering. It's sombreros. It's fun, right? So I have this fantasy of what a bullfight is in my head. Kind of because of the sun also rises too. So we figure it out. You know, Timmy, he's focused on it too. He's dialed in. He wants to do it. All the signs were there. Don't do this.
Whoa.
All of them. Every moment, every turn, Julie was like, I'm very sad. It saddens me that you want to go to a bullfight. And I'm like, really? Like, is it that bad? Is it that bad? So then we buy to the train station. We're trying to figure out how to get tickets to Madrid for an overnight stay and a bullfight. And it was a disaster. It was the DMV at its worst. Take a number. People were leaving. There's a couple of employees were doing their best to take care of everybody. But for the most part, it was a disaster. Probably 4 hours of my time. Going to the kiosk didn't work, go to this, go to the window. Finally, this woman helped us. We got 3 tickets for the train. And I figure we'll do hotels tonight when we get there. And hey, worst case scenario, we see an amazing city, right? The capital, Madrid. So we go. And OMG. Have you ever been described exactly what happens at a bullfight?
Actually, why don't you just go ahead and tell us?
I had no idea. So they come out and it's really formal and nice. And they go to where the royalty would be and the horses, and they bow to the area where the royalty would be, but they weren't there. Neither was 80% of the stadium. So it's like 20% full, which is a really good sign for the future of bullfighting. And then they bring out the bull, and in their face, Dr. Joe, it was like Rudy. It was like Bella. Like they were just like, what am I doing? Like, what's going on here? And they go out and get them all fired up, and they have their Olay drapes and get them all fired up. And he's like, okay, I'm fired up now. So I have no idea what's happening. Like, I'm like, okay, the matador, this hero, is going to come out in the middle now and have a fair fight. He's going to bring his thing out there, his little red thing, and have a fair fight, just like in Bugs Bunny, right? It was fair. And then this horse comes out, full padding, thick padding, blinders on the horse. So, because I mean, obviously, if a bull comes charging at a horse, the horse is going to freak out and run. Boom! Hits the horse. And I'm like, what is going on? And the guy on the horse spears the bull in the back of the head.
Yep.
Blood spurts out. I'm like, whoa. Mm-hmm. What is that? So then they get him fired up a little bit more.
And this is not the matador, right? This is the toreador.
The matador is around. So there was two stars, if you will.
Yeah.
And they were kind of around, but it was more like the rodeo clowns were running out there and just getting them fired up. So then two other individuals come out, and it was really weird. They're in like tights, and it looked like they had buoys in their hand or like bowling pins. And I'm like, what the hell are they doing? They're going to get hurt out there. And then bang, they spike the back of the neck of the bull with these two things, and they run away. And the bull sometimes chases them because it's like, you just stuck a knife in my back. And then the matador comes out, and this bull is like half alive at this point. Continues. And then that's where the drama is they're ole, everyone's cheering, ole. And I'm like, this animal's almost dead right now. Like, what is so cool about that? Mm-hmm. And then it's shh. The stadium's shushing each other. And he gets in his position with the sword.
The matador does.
Yes, sir. Bang! Right in the back of the head. And then maybe pulls it out and does it again. And then if it's not dead, there's folks that come over and like stir it around in his spine. And then they bring out the horses and they drag the body out of the stadium. It was the most gruesome, barbaric thing I've ever experienced.
Yeah. It's a powerful image. It's remarkable.
So here's the moral of the story.
Okay.
Don't go to a bullfight. Don't pay the money. Be like Barcelona. Turn it into a mall. It was not art, because I read some articles afterwards, and that's one of the debates. You know, we have art. It's custom. It's culture. You can't take this away. Oh, yes, we can.
It's a powerful story, a powerful image. I will tell you my story about it as well. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, I went to a bullfight.
Whoa. Who brought you?
My dad was a line. He actually took films of it. We have.
Had he been to one before?
I don't think so. And it was pretty much identical to what you say, but we have it all on tape on these old reel film, you know, REEL.
Click, 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 click.
And it's brutal. I mean, you know, there you are. It's a very interesting image.
It was one that I'm not going to ever get out of my head.
I'm glad that you went. You know, there's one thing about, you know, human beings, you know, taking the life of an animal. But there is another thing about other human beings dictating to other human beings what they can and cannot do with who they are, with their bodies, with their lives.
Can you please introduce our amazing guest?
Absolutely, Mark. Our guest tonight is an assistant professor of justice studies at San Jose State University. She earned her PhD in political science at Rutgers University, and her new book, The Pregnancy Police: Conceiving Crime, Arresting Personhood, is under contract with the University of California Press. Obviously, tonight we're talking about the new Thor movie. No, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone, Dr. Grace Howard.
Professor Grace Howard, thank you so much for being here tonight to talk about this topic that is affecting not just America, but the entire world.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's really important. I know it's been sort of a bananas couple of weeks here, but I'm never tired of talking about this. It's so important. It's such an intimate kind of feature in so many people's lives. And our lives are about to change kind of fundamentally. So I'm happy to be here to talk about it.
So let's just spell it out. So we're talking about the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, which I believe is about 49 years old, passed in like 1973.
That's correct. Yeah. Just shy of the 50th birthday. They knew we were going to have all kinds of like cool pro-choice swag, and they didn't want to give it to us.
So where do we start with this discussion? I mean, is it even a discussion tonight?
I don't know. I mean, it's like, this is huge, right? I mean, I know there's been a lot of discussion already about how the decision is written and what it means, but just to like quickly reiterate, essentially what the court did is it said, hey, I know that about 50 years ago, we said there was a right to privacy, but now we're deciding there's not. And they said essentially, but don't worry about it. We're not going to get rid of all of your privacy rights. We're only going to get rid of this one because the state of Mississippi says that this privacy right is leading to you destroying living humans, i.e. fertilized eggs, embryos, and fetuses, right? So that's what they said. But if you read between the lines, and I think that we really ought to, there is no way that they can have this decision written as is and not have it take out every other privacy right. Those are things like birth control. Those are things like gay marriage. Those are things like non-procreative sex of all kinds. I know we say like gay sex, but like non-procreative sex, period. I mean, when you saw anti-sodomy laws on the books, they weren't just for gay people. It was for non-procreative sex overall, right? So all of these things rely on a right to privacy, which is never explicitly stated in the Constitution. The word privacy isn't in there, right? But we can look at all these little amendments and kind of taken together. 50 years ago, the court said, it sort of looks like there's a right to privacy here. Let's do it, right? So this court in this opinion has essentially dismantled this whole thing. And that's really only the tip of the iceberg.
But now everyone in every state can vote on it, right? Like if I'm in any state, I get to vote.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is something that's really frustrating too, is that, I mean, I would suggest that the way that our voting system is set up, it's like inherently anti-democratic, right? The structure of the Senate, right? Where, you know, people in LA County, the population is so huge and it's bigger than, you know, all of these state populations put together, but California gets 2 senators just like every other state does. So, I mean, what this decision did was it kicked the issue back to the states. Right. And that means that if you are someone with voting rights in a state, then like hypothetically, you can vote and you can keep abortion legal where you are. That's really hypothetical, though, because this court, of course, has also been very active in gutting voting rights. Right, for like the last decade or so, they've been like really active in this way. We see all of this really rough gerrymandering that it's being ruled as acceptable, right? It used to be if states wanted to pass some kind of voting regulation, we would assume that that regulation was unconstitutional and the burden was on the state to prove this is why we really, really need this regulation. It had to be like super important, but we got rid of that too. Right. So now states can pass all of these voting restrictions. I know in my area of expertise, I work in reproductive law broadly, but I do a lot of work on the criminalization of pregnancy. And so this is a concern that we have too. If you make abortion a felony and we punish pregnant people who try to have abortions, then like we're about to have like a pretty substantial segment of the population have their voting rights removed. And we know that
that's a big leap. Isn't that a big leap right there?
I always thought this was a big leap.
Why would that be a big leap, Mark?
The suggestion that you just made there.
Oh, becoming felons and getting our voting rights taken away?
Yeah.
So in my
how would that happen? How would it go from today to that in process?
But before that, just let me just be sure. So if you are a felon and convicted of something and are in jail, your voting rights are taken away from you. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is another kind of, the technicality of it is a state by state thing, but in a lot of places, if you've ever been convicted of a felony, you lose your right to vote. In some states, after you get out of prison, you can like fill out paperwork and appeal to have that right restored, and they'll only do it for certain kinds of crimes. I believe if it's considered like nonviolent crimes. In my home state of Virginia, that was the case like a decade ago when a friend of mine was trying to get his voting rights back after incarceration. So how do we get there? Here's why I don't think it's a stretch. So the book I'm working on right now, I look at only 3 states, South Carolina, Alabama, and Tennessee. And these are the 3 states that ever officially, either through the courts or through the legislature, made it a crime for a pregnant person to do something that could have a negative impact on a fertilized egg, embryo, or fetus.
When was that?
Varying times. South Carolina, they started arresting people for stuff like this in the late 80s. And there were like a couple moments where it became varyingly official. I'd say 2003 is like most recent court one. Alabama did it in 2013. And in Tennessee, it was on the books for like 2 years, which is weird for a criminal law, but it's because people were like, should we do this? And it had a automatic sunset provision. So it expired after those 2 years, but that was like, say it ended in like 2018. And so, just from those 3 states, I have around 800 arrest cases of people who were charged with these crimes. And some of them were felonies. So
Convicted?
Sorry?
They were convicted,
or they take plea bargains, right? Because most criminal cases end with a plea bargain in the United States.
So they pled guilty to that crime.
Yeah, right. And so this is another important thing to note is that
let me just for our listeners just clarify distinctly what was the crime that they pled guilty to in the plea bargain.
So it can be. The technical charges that are brought vary a lot. They can be things like chemical endangerment of a minor, right? If you take a substance, even a legally prescribed medication that could potentially have a negative impact on a fetus. And we know there's a lot of misinformation about drugs and pregnancy too.
Like what?
No, let's stick with this.
Crack babies,
but it's coming at us so quickly.
Yeah.
Right, but let's just stick first with what were they pleading guilty to?
Yeah.
So the first one was endangerment of a minor.
Chemical endangerment. This was Alabama. It's mostly chemical endangerment there. Okay. There were some other things too. So there was someone self-managed an abortion illegally in South Carolina. She was 16 weeks pregnant at the time, could have gone to North Carolina to have a legal abortion, but she couldn't afford it and she didn't speak English and she had very little resources. So she did a medication abortion at home and she got caught and they tried to charge her with homicide. Eventually, she got the charges reduced a little bit to an illegal abortion. There are cases where people are charged feticide is another that we see. So these 2 aren't from my study states, but just as illustrative. So one of these cases was someone surviving a suicide attempt. She was in her 3rd trimester of pregnancy and an immigrant woman, pretty isolated in Indiana. Bebe Shui is her name. And her boyfriend left her and she freaked out and she ingested rat poison and survived. And went to the hospital and was like, do everything you can to save my baby. They did an emergency cesarean section, but the baby didn't make it. And she sat in prison or in jail rather, for a year. They didn't give her bond. She was charged with feticide, which is a felony. It's a homicide charge. She got out on a technicality, but just a few years later, another woman in Indiana was convicted for 2 things. Even though there was only 1 fetus, so it could technically only be 1. They say that she caused a miscarriage to happen. They charged her with neglecting a newborn and with causing the miscarriage, right? It can only be 1. And she got a 20-year sentence for this, right? So a lot of these folks are getting I mean, they're having their children taken away, which is substantial, right? But they are also having lengthy prison sentences or terms of probation that are just impossible to comply with, especially when you really look into kind of the details of their lives and what they have going on. Right. So this is all with the protection of Roe v. Wade, by the way. Right. I've got around 800 cases from my 3 states, but for the US, we've counted at least 1,800 arrest cases under Roe v. Wade. So without that, I think we should only expect to see more. I expect to see people, most of the time, people are getting arrested when they go to give birth. So like the baby comes out, they slap handcuffs on you and they put you in a solitary cell in a jail.
Where are we in this discussion at this point? Where do we go?
Well, so we've just been talking about all of this stuff that, folks have been able to get away with doing to people with the protection of Roe v. Wade on the books, right? And now that's just gone away. So where people were maybe getting arrested when they go to give birth, we're bringing charges then, I'm expecting now, and this is based on things that I've seen cops, district attorneys, healthcare providers in these states saying, that now we can go earlier, right? Because viability isn't an issue anymore. Roe v. Wade, spelled out that a person who is pregnant still counts as a person fully, and they have full rights to their body until viability, which was like, oh, that's such a low bar, right? But we don't even have that anymore. And so, this is technically true already in Alabama. This was true with Roe v. Wade on the books, but I think we'll start seeing this in more places where, technically speaking, if you were like 2 hours pregnant and you drank a beer, you are technically a felony child abuser in that state, right?
Even if you don't know that you're pregnant.
Even if you don't know that you're pregnant. Yes, they specified that knowledge of pregnancy is irrelevant, right?
So for substance abuse folks, this could be a blessing, right? So nobody should drink or do any drugs ever. I'm being
telling people that works great, right?
Right, exactly.
And so, most of the cases that I've seen did involve folks who were struggling with substance use disorder, became pregnant, and now what do we do, right? And apparently our answer to that was like, put them in cages. Hasn't been great health-wise. I'm seeing some stuff happening already, though. Obviously, there's all this kinds of trigger laws going into effect in various states. Kind of watching the update almost hourly to see, like, okay, are you allowed to do X, Y, and Z in Texas? But I've been noticing some other stuff too. So I've already been seeing that if you are someone who seems like you could become pregnant, I guess like female-ish and of reproductive age, some healthcare providers are not prescribing needed medications anymore to these patients because they're worried if you become pregnant, this medication could cause a miscarriage. And so I'm sorry that you have lupus. I'm sorry that you have rheumatoid arthritis. I'm sorry that you got long COVID and you need this medication for clotting, but it could cause a miscarriage and you look like you could get knocked up. So we're not going to give you these pills.
Some tear gas.
Can I ask you a question, Professor?
Yes.
How did you become so passionate about this topic?
So I was, I got all fired up, don't I? Well, so I wasn't really raised as a feminist, but some of these issues, even back in like middle school, seeing the injustices of like a little sister watching her big brother getting treated like a guy, and being like, this isn't fair. Kind of those early feminist origins. But when I was in college, I got much more involved and interested in reproductive rights, in sexual politics, frankly. I'm a victim of sexual violence. And for me, learning as much as I could about bodies and about sex and about reproduction was like this really healing, empowering thing. It's a knowledge that I wish I had had at a much earlier age. I think it would have helped me maybe contextualize and understand some things. And so, I got involved in campus groups and was writing all of my little college papers on these issues. And I
did you have any family that was upset?
Yeah. Yeah. I've got some awesome kind of pagan aunts. But yeah, my mom is so not into this stuff at all.
Is she pro-life?
I guess. Yeah. It's complicated with her. It's the sound of some foster cats that I have.
So do you have conversations with your mother about it?
Not anymore. We don't really talk anymore. But
so how did this conversation become the most divisive, most heated conversation that the world has ever seen?
I think a lot of bad faith politicking that led to some very effective kind of discourse framing and even like linguistic framing of this issue. That, I mean, now there's so much misinformation. Even like when news outlets are reporting on various bills, they'll say like, oh, it's a heartbeat ban bill. Like, don't call it a heartbeat ban, right? You're seeding the terror.
But why is it always a fight and not a conversation? It's always, there's a line drawn and you're either on that side or that side. I don't know when it became political, because it is absolutely political. Similar to COVID.
Political after, well, it's always been political, right? And varying stages.
But so back to when? Like, can you go back and give us the evolution of it? Like 1800s and what it was like as an illegal, and then when it became legal, and where the pushback was, and when it actually became this huge division.
Yeah. So I know Samuel Alito played like loosey-goosey with the history in the opinion too. I know a lot of pro-choice historians that are pissed about his characterization. Abortion has always been like a common thing. Like, as long as people have been wanting to have sex and not have babies, they've been finding ways to do that. And so, I mean, you can look historically, like at various plants and, stuff.
Ben Franklin wrote recipes on
a guide on how to do it safely. So this was something that was considered normal and considered normal.
But there was always still a group of people who thought that was wrong and immoral.
Not even yet. Not yet. Not
Really?
Quite yet. Even for Abrahamic religions, it was the moment of quickening was the kind of cutoff. So abortion was like a pretty normal part of life. You didn't regulate it because like we don't regulate a whole bunch of our normal stuff from life.
So going back to evolution, like we have no significant brain and we choose, like, we don't want another animal that we've birthed with, eat our child. Going back to that period of evolution, are we?
Well, I'm not sure that we can comment on that. We can speculate about it.
I'm not an anthropologist, but people were also having way fewer periods back in the caveman days because of things like malnutrition and stuff. So I think being burdened with like child after child and being bred to death is maybe not as much of an issue then. But so one of the things that we saw this era, we see the professionalization of medicine. They're trying to kind of, midwives do all that birth stuff. What if we did it instead, right? Kind of wanting to get into that territory.
That is
There's
true.
also concern about white women not having as many babies anymore. Right.
So
and this
when
kind
was
of
that? Where are we in the?
We're in the like mid 1800s.
Mid 1800s. Okay.
So that we've got immigration happening. We've never liked that much, depending on where they're coming from. And it's a normal kind of economic thing. As societies industrialize, there is less incentive to have a ton of kids. So we see white women having fewer children. We see this professionalization of medicine and doctors kind of wanting to scoop up birth.
What do you mean?
Well, that's true. That was part of Semmelweis. There's no question.
Birth.
Absolutely.
It was some like mystical women shit.
OB-GYN folks recognize. I'll just comment on this quickly. That the pregnant woman was a potential gold mine, and to take that away from midwives. There's no question that was happening around the 1830s, 1840s. Absolutely. Yeah. And we can talk about Semmelweis later on, but let's go back to this. So I think Tom did some research about what was your sense about the Constitution?
Yeah. So, and I think it's a bit fallacious to say, well, what would the founding fathers say? But as a reference, the founding fathers thought the topic of abortion to be so trivial that it didn't warrant mention in the Constitution.
Mm.
Yeah,
Because
like
it was so normalized.
we don't legislate breakfast cereal,
right?
Or like pants,
Because
they're just like, yeah, pants.
And my wife commented that we don't legislate whether you can get a coronary bypass.
Right.
So you're saying that the evolution was the people saying that this isn't right.
Yeah. And it's around that same time that we see a religious
Which is what
shift.
time?
So, well, some people said it's not right.
Mid 1800s, right? So it's also,
it was normalized until the mid 1800s.
Well, I'm not sure normalized. Right? It was.
I think
not.
It's still normal. We just have to pretend like it's not.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to go back and see the evolution of how someone from the 1880s got to the 2022.
Mm-hmm. So some more things happened, right? So
when did
let's hear the more things.
When did the people start to say, like, this isn't right and we're stepping aside?
We don't have good poll data from back then, but we can look at what these big institutional moves were that were being made. And one of the big ones is a religious shift. And this is, I mean, the Catholics, right? This was big for Catholicism, but the Abrahamic faiths in general, this was like sort of the rule, is that quickening, or being able to feel the fetus moving inside of you, is when the fetus gets its soul. And if you Google image quickening, there's like a painting of like a baby flying through the sky and like going into like a sleeping woman. And so as long as you were having
1880s,
that was for like centuries and centuries.
Okay.
Right. And something that's notable about that is only the pregnant person can tell you when that happens. Right. It's literally her ability to like feel the movement. Right. But there was the shift. The Catholic Church said, actually, not anymore. Quickening isn't going to be the thing anymore. Now abortion's illegal all the time, right? And to me, it's difficult to separate that out from a lot of the other stuff that's happening, in this time period. But so those are like three big things that happen. And then we have the passage of what are called the Comstock laws. So Anthony Comstock, one of my students.
Obscenity laws.
Yeah, one of my students, I asked the class, we were doing exam review, and I was like, who's Anthony Comstock? And the student was like, he was that guy that was afraid of sex, right? And I just thought that was so funny. So he was a postmaster general, but he was also this like big anti-obscenity guy. And he wrote this piece of legislation that went into effect that made it a crime to send anything considered obscene through the mail. And this included medical textbooks. This included pamphlets about like the rhythm method. And then this included also the actual instruments, herbs, et cetera, that you would use to do contraception, that you would use to do abortion. And so at this point, everything.
Did he say that in his law? It was like included, but not limited to, and named these? Or was that over time courts were like, well, maybe it does apply. This is obscene to me. So
I mean, our trying to figure out what counts as obscene is like been constantly changing. But no, like it was pretty adamant.
His law was like, I don't want people sending obscene child
no condoms or porn
mail.
Or medical textbooks with pictures of naked people.
But that it said that, or it was just like obscene defined in his mind. Isn't it subjective? I mean,
I don't mean to slow things down. Things that we've been talking about.
This is a 3-hour show, right?
Clearly one of the most politicized, divisive decisions, and yet who has the right to take away a decision from a woman, from anyone? Who has the right to do that? So let's we've got a few minutes left. Professor Howard, what about that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this, as someone who, like, I'm knock-upable, so like, it is a really jarring thing that something that was once considered a fundamental right is now something that I do not have the right to anymore, not a protected constitutional right to anymore. And, where I am now in California, I'm safe, but I have friends that live in these states with bans. I have students that live in these states with bans, and I'm really worried about what's going to happen to them. I think we were talking about reasons why people have abortions. And I think that there's a lot of misinformation about this. Most people who have an abortion in the United States are already moms. 60% of people who have abortions have already had one child. And so in a big way, when we talk about making sure people have the right to abortion, we are trying to make sure that families are okay, right? And we look at the reasons that people give for why they have abortions. It's a combination of things. I mean, I'm a free abortion on demand without apology gal myself. Right. But most of the time it's happening in the first trimester, over 90% of the time. And it's happening because we don't have good childcare. It's happening because you can't continue education. It's happening because it won't work with your job. It's happening because you can't afford it. We don't have great resources for families. We have a serious poverty problem in the United States. The maternal mortality rate in this country is really high for a developed country. And because of this decision, we anticipate that it's going to go up a lot. By around 33% for Black women who already have this hugely elevated rate. And so, you know, we're talking about the lives and the families of people who can get pregnant. And then when we look at some of the kind of far-reaching implications of this decision, it's about what rights do people with the capacity for pregnancy have? Because we're seeing these decisions being made on the basis that at some point in the future, you could become pregnant against your will, right? Like being denied your medication for this reason. In the past, we've deprived people of certain kinds of employment for this reason. If you couldn't prove you were infertile, you weren't allowed to work in some of the best factory jobs, for example, right? So yeah, I mean, the implications of this are huge. What it comes down to is, are people with the capacity for pregnancy fully people under the law or not? And with this decision, it was a big push in the direction of not.
Again, I got to say, because a lot of people have images in their head of what an abortion is. So I went to Catholic school for, I'd say, preschool to maybe 5th grade. And I read in our student Bibles, there was a passage about, you know, abortion, about what it is. And it describes the worst case scenarios of a 3rd trimester, like something that no one actually wants. The procedure of, and I won't go into detail on the radio, but it's grisly. And it
can be, yeah.
Well, because this is 3rd trimester.
Yeah.
A 1st trimester abortion is a heavy flow period.
Well, I mean, so it takes about 2 minutes if you're doing an aspiration abortion, right? It takes about 2 minutes to actually do the thing. I used to work at a clinic. I was a hand holder at a clinic, so helping people breathe and feel their feelings and do the pain, all this stuff. Most people feel relief after they have an abortion. Most people, some clinics will knock you out, and some patients want that, which I respect. Our clinic didn't do that. People were awake just with ibuprofen, right? So it's not surgical, nothing gets cut, and it's quick, and recovery is not really intense, and it is so safe. It is so much safer than so many other totally common outpatient procedures. Yeah. And yeah, that's over 90% of abortions are.
And that's what I think it's really insulting to think that so many women are these evil witches who want to get pregnant so that in their 3rd trimester, they can have the fully formed baby ripped out and torn apart in front of their eyes so they can sell the limbs to make vaccines.
Yeah.
These people are a fantasy.
Well, and it freaks people out pretty good too, right? I mean, can you think of anything more horrible? If you are interested in the reality of 3rd trimester abortion, I recommend a documentary called After Tiller. They follow I think at the time, 5 remaining abortion providers who would do 3rd trimester abortions. And you see the things that they do to make the experience as painless as possible for their patients. And that includes, if patients want to, the ability to hold and grieve an intact baby once it's been removed, right? So there are all kinds of ways of managing that. The amount of courage and compassion.
You're in favor of that. That's.
Yeah. You know, it is less than 1% of abortion cases, and it is basically always a wanted pregnancy when something's gone terribly wrong. And so parents are in this position of deciding, okay, we can, continue to carry this dying pregnancy, and you'll feel it and you'll think of it and it's in your body at all times, right? Or you can give birth to a baby that will have a short, painful, terrible life, or we can take care of it now.
What do you say to somebody who says that's murder? That's immoral. Can we have a conversation and agree to disagree?
Here's what I would say. Legally speaking, anyway, at least for now, we are not allowed.
How about forget
let her finish.
Yeah.
So because morally, it's hard when we're talking about murdering people. It is hard for us to come to a moral consensus. But I would say that, you know, you're essentially requiring someone to use their body against their will to support the life of another, and that's considered a form of indentured servitude, and that's not legal in this country. In terms of morally, I think most of the parents who are making that decision are making a moral decision for themselves. They are choosing to spare their baby of pain and suffering.
So we're talking about fetuses that are already at risk for profound medical compromisation when they are born. Not necessarily a baby that is healthy and ready to go, but these are fetuses that have been diagnosed by professionals that this baby is at high risk for a life of trauma,
and a short one at that, right? Like short, painful. I mean, and sometimes it's not even there's no question that the baby won't survive. It's a matter of, well, its heart's still beating and it's inside your body, and so even though you are going septic right now, a reality, right? Mm-hmm. The heart's still beating, so we won't do anything. I mean, a woman in Ireland died. That's one of the things that galvanized the movement there to legalize abortion, right? The hospital couldn't do anything. The Constitution says that the fetus in your body, the heart is still beating. It's a person, and so we can't help you. And so we're going to watch you while you slowly die on this table. She went septic and died from blood infection because of the pregnancy. And we've been seeing this already too. So like, not in the third trimester, but ectopic pregnancies. It's a pregnancy where the egg implants somewhere other than the uterus. So these are not viable pregnancies. And most of the time it settles in the fallopian tube and it'll kill you, right? It'll rupture the tube, you'll hemorrhage and die. We've already been seeing cases in a handful of states with bans where physicians don't feel like they can do the medical treatment until they consult hospital lawyers. And there was just a case, they didn't disclose the state, but it was just last week where someone came in with an ectopic pregnancy. They consulted with lawyers for 11 hours before they treated her. And in that time, the tube did rupture and she'd been bleeding out. I mean, it's nightmare stuff.
So was the baby all right?
Professor, we have a few minutes left and there's so much more to discuss, but the IM approach, and this is still an IM, says because the four domains, your home, the social, biological, and ICM, we've been talking about all four of these. Because the four domains interconnect, a small change can have a big effect. You don't have to change everything. There has been a small change with a big effect. Professor Howard, what small change can you recommend to our listeners as we begin to grapple with the new ruling?
I would say believe people when they tell you about their bodies and their lives. Believe them.
Believe them. Okay. The second truth of the IM, you control no one, you influence everyone. You get to choose the kind of influence you want to be. Professor Grace Howard, what kind of influence do you want to be?
I want to be a caring influence. Just think like human animals, like our fingernails kind of suck and like our teeth aren't that sharp and our knee joints don't make any sense, but we're like good at being together, right? And humanity works when we're together and humanity works when we care about one another.
Yes, that is very true. Folks, I hope that we can continue this very important discussion, not an argument. Mark is absolutely right. We need to be able to respect each other, value each other, so we can trust each other with our points of view. This is how we come together as a community, as a culture, as a species. We all want the same thing, to feel valuable. My concern is that when someone's rights are taken away, where is their value? And I'm not saying one way or the other, but we are in a position right now where we have a country that must come together. Professor Howard, thank you so much for being on the Dr. Joe Show tonight.
Thank you so much.
Barry, we'll see you next week.